Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. The election of Donald Trump in the United States is obviously something a lot of us are talking about. One of our senators in Ottawa, the Honorable Gignac, wrote a very interesting piece that really was, I think, really provocative in what it means for Canada and what it means for our national government and what changes we've got to make because of this. He's a gentleman, a senator that I've followed on social media for a while and tried to get him on my show before. His writing has been very provocative. And so I thought it'd be great to hear what he thinks the election of Donald Trump means for Canada and what we've got to do. Senator, welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for the invitation, Brian.
My pleasure. So tell us, please, what is your argument? What do you think the election of Donald Trump means for Canada, and what have we got to do?
I think that we need a great reset, a grand reset, because quite frankly, this government for the last few years has been oriented on the wealth distribution agenda, not the wealth creation agenda, and fight climate change rather than adapt to climate change. I think with what's going on in US side, Canada have to adjust the economic and budget policy to be much more competitive. Otherwise, Brian, the currency will go to 65 cents.
So you think our currency is at risk?
Yeah, definitely, because, for the last 2 years, our GDP per capita declined. We are back to 2016 level. At the same time, in US, we exceed by 14% 2016 level. And guess what? We have 72 cents. And if we have, in addition, any tariff, 10% tariff, we are screwed. The Desjardins group expect that we can experiment a recession. So quite frankly, what that means, the burden of the recovery would be on the shoulder of Bank of Canada. So that means lower interest rate. At the time, the Federal Reserve will probably go on the sideline. So what that means is a much lower currency, which is not good for you and me and people who listen to us for the our standard of living. So
if Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asked you into his office and asked you for some advice, what would you tell him?
Exactly. That's, in Senate, I'm an independent senator. I do not attend Liberal caucus or whatsoever. I've been in politics 15 years ago in Quebec as Minister of Economy and Innovation for the Liberal Party, but they have no link with Trudeau. So it's a privilege to be senator. But if you want my free advice, probably prorogue this parliament, because the parliament going nowhere. Nothing has happened the last 6 weeks in House of Commons. So have a great reset, going to the drawing board, rethink about the economic policies, and adapt maybe the next budget to be much more pro-business agenda rather than new spending and new social program and this kind of things. Yeah, make no mistake, we have the lowest debt in percentage of GDP in the G7, but thanks to the previous government, what we have to do, you have to have a pro-business agenda to create wealth, stimulate innovation.
The NDP and/or the Bloc Québécois have been keeping the Trudeau government in power with a progressive agenda, either pharmacare or increased spending for the old age pension. What's the chance that either the NDP or the Bloc Québécois would support a liberal pro-business agenda?
It's a great question, because in the politics 101, this is a minority government. It's not a majority government. So you have at the same time to have a different economic agenda to stimulate growth, stimulate economy innovation, to attach and have a deal with probably NDP, because with NDP is probably closer to the Liberal. So what you have to do is maybe to have an agenda that NDP will keep the support for the next 6 months. For example, have elements that help workers. We have a lesson to take from the US Trump election, because a lot of folks, renters and workers, has been screwed up in the last 4 years. Yes, inflation is back to what it was 4 years ago, but the cost of living is 25% higher. So a lot of blue workers have been affected, standard of living decline. So you have to deal with NDP and have a program to help the blue-collar workers, from my point of view, probably renters as well, to have the support of NDP and to prolong for the next 6 months. Otherwise, personally, I don't mind if it's conservative government or it's a liberal government. I'm an independent senator. I will respect the choice of Canadians, But if he want to survive another 6 months, yes, he need the support of NDP. But NDP have an upside to maintain Liberal in power. What is the upside of the NDP? Is because you have the dental care, you have the pharma care. If you want to attach further deal with provinces, NDP needs 6 more months, additional months, because it will be complicated for Poilievre to after that. So maybe it could be the best interest of both to have a deal, but it's important to have a pro-business agenda rather than just distribute wealth, because we no longer create wealth in Canada. That's the problem.
We no longer create wealth. We just divide it up. Is that true?
Exactly. That's my thinking.
So I want to ask you a question. You say that you've been involved in politics for more than a decade. One of the things that I've heard interviewed, I've been talked about a fair amount in the United States, is that union members actually shifted from being Democratic supporters and ended up voting for Donald Trump in huge amounts. And so that's the blue collar people that you're talking about. Unions have typically been supportive of the NDP in Canada. Do you think union members are actually going to be no longer supporting the NDP or the Liberal Party, but supporting the Conservative Party in Canada? Or at least, are we at risk of that?
It's hard to tell. I'm not a political analyst specialist. I'm just an economist. But I've noticed what you describe. I've noticed the same thing. That's the reason that if this government wants to stay in power longer, he need a deal with NDP. He need to take care of the blue-collar workers, whatever is the tips at the restaurant, that to be non-taxable, or have some plan really to workers and create jobs. This is what, because people no longer trust Biden administration, because the cost of living, as mentioned earlier, is 25% higher than it was 4 years ago, and the wages has never followed. So it's up to Trudeau government to decide what is the plan. But it's up to Canadians after that, whatever is 3 months from now or 9 months from now, to decide which one is the more credible for the next 4 years. And as a senator, I will respect the choice of the Canadian, and I will work whatever the government Canadian would choose.
So you're really worried that that Canada is going to be in a tough situation with Donald Trump as the new president of the United States. Some of the things that he is suggesting from an economic standpoint include a substantial increase in tariffs. What do you think the impact of a 10 or 20% tariff on Canadian products would be?
It would be tough. They have a short-term pain and long-term gain. What is the short-term pain? 650 billion export a year with US. So that means that, in fact, 10% tariff, it's a big hit on Canada. Desjardins Group predict we will experiment a recession if we have a 10% tariff on the 650 billion export a year. In fact, it's more than 2 billion a day, exportation. So, but the problem is not only in short term, Brian. The problem is over the long, medium, and long term. Why? What kind of signal you send to the international companies or Canadian companies? Despite we have free trade US, you're not protected against a tariff with US. So better to be located in US, or if you want to make new investment, go to US. This is the problem in medium and long term if we have a tariff. And that's the reason that I suggest to colleagues and suggest to you via LinkedIn that maybe we have a way to avoid this 10% tariff. It's not too late, but we have to work very hard in the coming weeks, coming months, to be ready that when Trump will will start to lead US in mid-January, that we have to be prepared with a game plan to avoid a 10% tariff.
And what's that game plan, do you think?
I think first we have no credibility on military spending. We have one of the worst in the NATO. We are in the NATO, we have in the NORAD. I have the privilege to visit the NORAD headquarters in Colorado. Personally, I think that if we want to increase our credibility on military spending with Mr. Trump, that national security, it's important for Canadians. Just so not only social program, but we accept that it's national security. We have to accelerate our military spending, maybe protect more at Arctic Ocean and the north of Canada. So that could mean to accelerate that, rather to have a target 2032 without specific plan, to accelerate that 2027 maybe reach 2% target with much more money on military spending and infrastructure in north of Canada, in close to the Arctic Ocean. So for me, acceleration of military spending is one way, and increase our concern about national security. For the best or the worst, our neighbor is US, it's our friend, but we have to deal with their preoccupation, no doubt about that.
You also, in your roadmap to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, suggested a change in our climate change program. Tell me what change you're recommending.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks to ask me, because that helped me to precise my thought. Because as a grandfather, as a senator, I'm concerned about the climate change and global warming. Make no mistake about that. But at the same time, Brian, we represent 1.5% of global greenhouse emission. 1.5%. Even if we shift from 1.5 to 1.2 in the next 5 years on global, they will have no significant impact on global warming. So what I mentioned, I understand carbon tax, I understand the agenda of Trudeau government, but maybe we have to put more money on the adaptation of climate change. Right now, municipalities, cities experiment the burden of the climate change, the global warming, flooding, wildfire. It's a great country in Canada. So maybe we have to prepare a program, not via infrastructure bank and this kind of thing, but just send money directly to the cities and the local municipality to adjust to the climate change adaptation. Yes, we have fight and we do our best, but it's not easy. But rather than target oil and gas industry, maybe at the time that Trump mentioned drill, baby, drill, that he will probably exit from Paris Accord. Maybe in our case, we keep maybe our view on fighting climate change and global warming, but why not spend much more effort and money to the adaptation to climate change? It will be better for Canadian economy, Canadian, and that would stimulate the economy at the same time.
And get rid of the carbon tax?
It's a question. As an economist, I have difficulty to get out of carbon tax without an alternative. Give me cap and trade, just like we have in Quebec, for example, cap and trade compared to carbon tax. For as an economist, is equivalent. I know that carbon tax is a scapegoat and it's not very popular. We don't have that in Quebec. It's cap and trade, but what I need and ask to Conservative Party for the next government, please, if you scrap carbon tax, it's up to you. But could you offer an alternative to carbon tax? Because I think we have to be a responsible citizen and fight climate change. But I understand that people have been declining standard of living, our prices and so on. And now carbon tax, it's complicated and it's tough for people. But I will let that to the Conservative government or Trudeau government if you want to scrap. I doubt very much that Liberal government will scrap, but maybe offer, please, an alternative if you scrap the carbon tax.
You know, I've done some studies on carbon tax as part of a doctorate program that I did, and I really firmly believe it is the best way to incentivize people to move away from carbon. But you're the economist here, sir. I really wonder whether when we're close to potentially being in a recession and inflation has been so high and people are feeling financially strapped, is now the time for a new tax?
Yeah, it's a good question. The point is that if you go on and off with the carbon tax, it's not the good signal to give. I think that you can compensate. People do not realize that federal government receives $0, zero revenue for the carbon tax. All the carbon tax has been recycled to the Canadian. People are not aware of that. They really believe that, in fact, it's to the federal government revenue. It's not the federal government revenue. You need to explain to people. I really believe that carbon tax is a very good policy, even if it's not popular. But if you scrap, please propose something else, like cap and trade that we have in California, cap and trade that we have in Canada, in Quebec, excuse me, it's a pretty good alternative.
But you made the point, sir, in your own in one of your own posts that in the United States, people were told that the economy was doing well, that inflation was down, but they didn't feel it, and so therefore it didn't really matter. What mattered is how they felt, and I think the carbon tax is the same thing. You can be told that the money is recirculated and that you're going to be just as well off after the carbon tax as before, but when you're actually paying that carbon tax, and when Pierre Poilievre and other people tell you over and over again that it's bad, isn't it sort of like the same situation as in the United States?
I understand your parallel because, for a lot of people, this is the mistake of Democrats. Democrats go to the 10,000 feet, explain principle and so on. But at the end of the day, when the cost of living is 25% higher than it was 4 years ago, you have a problem when you go to the grocery for the bill that you have to pay. Housing is the same thing. Carbon tax is just an additional stuff that you have difficulty to accept. I really understand that. That's the reason I'm open-minded that you can adopt another approach, which is cap and trade, which is much more subtle, I would say, but it's pretty efficient as well to fight climate change. So it's up to the Canadians to decide and to the parties to decide what kind of roadmap to it is. But clearly, if Trudeau government do not change their approach, I think that it will not be good for Canadians, but it will not be good for business either, because in US, for example, they reduce taxes. In Canada, we increase gain of capitals inclusion rate, which is not good, and we will just not be competitive. And I mentioned earlier, Brian, the result will be a lower Canadian dollar, which is a tax on your standard of living, because your standard of living will decline when you have a lower Canadian dollar.
We're chatting tonight with a senator in the Canadian government, Senator Clement Gignac. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, sir. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with the senator in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Senator Clement Gignac with me tonight. He is a senator, an independent senator in the House of, not the House of Commons, in the Senate of Canada, a Canadian part of the Canadian government. And he's been prolific in writing on social media and articles about his criticism, frankly, of our economic plans and policies in Canada. And so it's a real pleasure and an honor to have him on our show tonight. Sir, you say that you've been in politics for more than a decade. You were a minister in the Quebec government. Tell me just a little bit of background. How and why did you get involved in politics? Yeah,
I never thought in my life I would go to active politics, Brian, to be honest. I was the chief economist of National Bank for more than a decade. And in fact, I realized that in Quebec, we have some problem with indebtedness and the wealth creation agenda. So I received the invitation of Premier Jean Charest at that time. We talk about 2009. And in fact, it was during the financial crisis. Interestingly enough, at that time, I left National Bank. I was a special advisor to Finance Deputy Minister. I worked with Steve McLean, currently the Governor of Bank of Canada. And at that time, Mark Carney was Governor of Bank of Canada. I thought I would stay in Ottawa for 7 years. I stayed for only 7 months. I've been the privilege to represent my country, Canada, as the official representative of G20 working group. So it was a great experience, but I joined finally politics as a Minister of Trade, Innovation, and Economic Development in Quebec. So I never regret to have done politics, but now to be as a senator and give me my free advice to Canadians and to politicians in Ottawa.
And so how long have you been a senator?
So I've been nominated 3 years ago. Between 2012 and 2021, I've been chief economist and portfolio manager of I Financial Group.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. One of the things that you've been talking about today and in a lot of your posts is that we don't have a business-friendly agenda, that we have been thinking about more of income distribution than we have about the growth of the economy. Some people have said that the problem is because we don't have business people as part of the cabinet. We don't have a growth agenda, a prosperity agenda. The former Minister of Finance wrote a whole book that was suggesting that we don't have a growth agenda in Canada. Do you think that's a problem?
I don't know, Brian. I will be blunt, and in fact, maybe it's due to the fact it's a minority government. Because in that cabinet, you have people with a lot of skill. When you think about François Philippe Champagne, Jean Duclos, to name a few, and I think it's due to the fact you have a minority government. If you want to stay in power, if you want to stay in Ottawa in power, you have to deal with NDP. And NDP is about new social program, wealth distribution. So I respect for people who vote for NDP, make no mistake. But if you want to distribute wealth, you have to create wealth at the first place. So what happened in the last 2 decades, we cleaned the book, we have a lower debt in percentage GDP, but now we do not create wealth for the last few years. We just distribute wealth. We are on the same Greece and Argentina road, which is not very good. It's no problem for the next decade, but we will have a problem for our children, our grandchildren. That's the reason. It's not about lack of skill of this cabinet. It's about orientation and the fact that the agenda is dictated by NDP in the last few years. So here we have Trump election. It's a game changer. I think Mr. Trudeau have to make a huge reset on his economic agenda. Maybe reshuffle his cabinet and maybe just prorogue this parliament. Nothing happened the last 5 weeks, excuse me. So if you prorogue, you return to the drawing board. Harper had done that twice. Stephen Harper government, minority government had done that twice. Prorogue, return drawing board, and have a plan. Particularly with Trump, you need a plan. So it's not lack of skill. Maybe it's a lack of will. It's more that's what I think.
A lack of will?
But let's say that if he maintained the same approach that he have done the last 2 years, we have a problem because you have this tariff coming from US if we do nothing. So we have to spend more on military spending. We have to do our best to show to Americans that national security matters for us, and in fact, maybe adjust to have a pro-business agenda. So we will see, but it's not the lack of skill of the current government, but right now it is because the NDP drive the agenda. So you have to take control of the agenda and now adopt a pro-business. I'm an optimistic guy by nature. Notice what happened in immigration. They have shifted 180 degrees. So I'm optimistic that it could shift 180 degrees or 100 degrees minimum that adopt more a pro-business agenda than just new program distribution, increase the size of the public workers, you know what I mean. So we need a great reset. Otherwise, just call an election and Canadians will decide.
So, but, how do you do that is, I guess, the important question. You were Minister of Economic Development Innovation in the province of Quebec. You're the former chief economist for National Bank. You have thought about this, I presume, a lot. My understanding is that our productivity in Canada about 5-7 years ago was equal to the United States. Today, it's 40% less than the United States. Our real median incomes haven't grown in 10 or 15 years. We have been doing something wrong in Canada for a long time, such that we don't have that prosperity. People today are not making the same as they were a decade ago. What's gone wrong and how do we change it?
We will not fix that in 6 months. We can put in place winning condition. Yeah, we can set the table, have a winning condition to reverse the trend, but you will not see, unfortunately, the result in the next 6 months. It could take 5-6 years. But when you are a leader, you're responsible, you have to adjust to the new reality in US. And if you want to attract the best skill and stimulate innovation, you have to readjust your economic agenda. For example, taxation of gain of capital is not the best way to stimulate innovation and entrepreneurship. Do you know the last time that inclusion rate has been reduced? It was 24 years ago. Paul Martin, a finance liberal minister, has reduced from 75 to 66 to 50%. It was in 2000. And the reason he have done that is to stimulate innovation, attract the best skill. Because in the artificial intelligence, for example, in Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver, if you want to attract the best skill and talent, you have to compete with Silicon Valley. So I think our taxation, for example, the project on taxation gain capital is not a good one. So make no mistake, you will not see the impact in the next 6 months if you change the agenda. But people are, I respect the judgment of Canadians. If Canadians realize that governments start to do the right thing, maybe you have better chance to be re-elected. And if it's not re-elected, in my case, I have no problem. I'm an independent senator. I will deal with what Canadians will decide as government. If it's conservative, I will work with the conservative. But I ask our leader to take note that we have Trump south of the border and our economic agenda is not the appropriate one right now, not only for the 6 months, but it's not the appropriate one for the next 4 years.
So, reducing, if not changing the capital gains inclusion rate would be one issue, and sort of reverting back to the old inclusion rate that it was to spur innovation. That's one policy. But what else could we do? What Donald Trump is talking about is tariffs. Would that work in Canada? What Biden worked on was the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIP Act that was really industrial policy, where he was giving government grants and subsidies from the federal government to industries to get them going. Some people have talked about flow through shares or other incentives to get people, accelerated depreciation. What are some of the things that you would be recommending other than just the capital gains tax rate that would spur productivity and innovation?
Yeah, capital gains is one aspect. The taxation rate, because if you combine provincial and federal level, we are exceed the U.S. We have to be more competitive. In U.S., in addition, Mr. Trump wants to reduce to 15%. Could you believe it? 15% is very, very low. So we have to understand, we have to invest much more as well in the research and development, in innovation, entrepreneurship. We have a lot of red tape in Canada as well. So my point is that maybe we have to develop some Canadian program. Think about possible to have a high-speed train. This is the only G7 country that have no high-speed train. So if you want to develop what equivalent to the Maritime Canal, it was 6 decades ago, you need a high-speed train between Toronto and Quebec, or let's say maybe between Oshawa and Quebec. So the point is you develop the country, you adapt to the climate change. If you adapt to the climate change, this is a lot of investment. You have to invest more in military spending and so on. So to be blunt, as an economist, when I have the French country with the deficit 5.5% per year, percentage GDP, US an annual deficit 7% of GDP per year, what the point to target 1%? Maybe we have to target 2%. You will have more maneuvering room. It's up to the politician to decide if the fiscal anchor is still the appropriate one. But if they maintain the fiscal anchor of 1%, 40 billions, be prepared to cut a lot, because you need to cut the size of government if you want to comply on military spending.
We're chatting about an agenda, a roadmap for the Prime Minister of Canada, put forward by our senator, our guest tonight, Senator Clement Gignac, senator from Quebec, who's put forward really quite an interesting agenda. Number one, accelerate military spending and investments in the Arctic to become a serious partner in NORAD and reach the target of 2% of GDP more quickly. 2, review our economic policies to adopt a pro-growth business agenda and a more competitive taxation environment. 3, revisit the current budgetary anchors of target deficit of less than 40 billion and 1% of GDP, which is what he just mentioned, which is really kind of interesting and opposite of what a lot of people are recommending right now. 4, adopt a vast climate change adaptation program rather than the reduction climate change programs and the carbon tax that we have now. And number 5, prorogue the parliamentary session and do a reset and get it started all over again. Fascinating agenda, sir. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with the senator in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.
You cover.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a senator of our Canadian government, Senator Clement Gignac, who's got really quite a fascinating background. He's been the chief economist at the National Bank. He was selected to be advisors for some parliamentarians in Ottawa. He returned to Quebec and became a minister in the Quebec government, Minister of Economic Development and Innovation. And then he was appointed to the Senate of Canada. And just last week, after the election of Donald Trump, he put forward a roadmap that the Canadian government, that Prime Minister Trudeau has got to follow if he wants to really respond to effectively the election of Donald Trump. Why do you think, if I could ask, sir, Donald Trump won?
I think it's back to economics here, because when you drill the data and check who has voted for, even in the rural area, in some element that you can see a lot of migrants have voted for different nationalities, it's about the cost of living. The question, Mr. Trump, one of the best questions he asked to the voters out there, are you in a better situation than 4 years ago? By asking the question, are you in a better situation than 4 years ago? The answer was no, because for a lot of people, except the rich maybe, and the rich vote for different reasons given his agenda. But for a lot of people, renters, blue-collar workers, the cost of living has increased between 23 to 28%, depending which city you're living in US, and never your wages has compensated for the increase of a cost of living. Because when you factor in the income tax, you need a 40% wage acceleration to offset the 25% cost of living increase. So a lot of Americans has concluded that, in fact, their economic situation being worse than 4 years ago. They don't like Trump necessarily for their value. They do not share Trump value, but they believe that anyway, it will not do exactly all the things he will mention, because we have seen Trump during 4 years. We know this guy, but clearly it's about the cost of living has been the most important factor behind the Trump election.
The cover of the Economist magazine a week ago was that the U.S. economy is a rocket ship. It's on fire. It's doing better than any other economy in the G7. The economists that took a look at Donald Trump's economic program and the impact of mass deportations of 20 million people and the impact of a 20% tariff would be devastating on the U.S. economy and fuel inflation all over again and probably a recession, cause a recession. And yet, people didn't listen to the Economist magazine or to the economists that were making these assessments of the different programs, and they still voted for Donald Trump. Why?
Yeah, the question is, which is the percentage of Americans who read The Economist? I read The Economist, you read The Economist, but how many Americans read The Economist to start with? So I think that is just few people who read The Economist. Yeah, it's mentioned in the newspaper, I understand, but this is not necessarily the preoccupation of the mainstream people. So I think that when you analyze the mainstream people concern, it's about grocery, it's about housing. This is their preoccupation much more. So yes, at first glance, this program looked like a recipe for catastrophe, but I think we have to take with a grain of thought his program. I doubt very much he will proceed with all it was mentioned. Do you really believe he will deport 20 million Americans? I doubt very much, and where they will go anyway. So Canada could accept some of them, but it will just few. So I think that he exaggerates always in his statement, and but having said that, Trump will not change. He will run the U.S. country like he have run in the first 4 years. It will be run the same way, hoping it will be less bumpy, but you will not change Trump. So my point that you have to do our best to protect Canada in such environment. And thanks, we have a free trade agreement with U.S., but no complacency. We have to adjust to this new reality.
The number 3 recommendation you made is the one that I was surprised by, and I think goes counter to what a lot of people have been thinking. You're actually arguing that our budget deficit anchors are too tight, too stringent. You're saying that our deficit target of less than 40 billion and 1% of GDP compared to 6% of GDP on the US, and I think you quoted 5% in France. You think that we could have a bigger deficit. Most people are arguing that our debt and deficit are too high and should be reduced.
I think this is the most controversy in my five recommendation is the most controversy. And as an economist, I know I surprise you, but we have to be realistic. We have the lowest public debt in percentage of GDP in the G7, one of the best role model, if you want. The point is France have 5.5% annual percentage GDP. US have 7%, and Mr. Trump will accelerate spending in addition. So you have the choice, Brian. We stay with 40 billions and 1% GDP, do not create wealth, do not spend on military spending, and be screwed by 10% tariff, or accept to put on the back burner, maybe revise upward our anchor, spend more on military spending, spend more on adaptation to climate change, accept temporary a deficit 60, 70 billions, and avoid a recession and avoid a 10% tariff. Quite frankly, I think this is the dilemma we have. And if we do nothing, we will be hit by Trump, we'll have a 10% tariff, we'll experiment a recession, and guess what? When you experiment a recession, anyway, you do not respect your budget target and the 1% target. So by purpose or not, I think that I predict that you will have a higher deficit in such environment scenario that we have with Donald Trump. I prefer to be proactive, that by purpose, we spend more in military spending, take care of Arctic, and adaptation, help cities, and have a planned high-speed train between Toronto and Quebec, and invest, not spend in grocery, but invest for the Canadian future and for our national security, then just be on the back burner and be dogmatic with the 1% of GDP. And guess what? If Desjardins is right, we will experiment a recession, 65 cents, and anyway, we will be over target anyway.
So, sir, I think most people think that the Canadian deficit is too big and that the debt is too big. And that's been sort of the talking points politically for a long period of time, and making jokes of Justin Trudeau's comment about the deficit will take care of itself. I had a guest on my show that said that Ontario is the most indebted non-sovereign entity in the world. The only people that have more debt than Ontario is countries. So why do we have this perception that our deficit is too big and our debt too big, if you're saying the opposite is true, it's not big enough?
Yeah, not big enough, I will maybe put differently. But, I follow public finance for the last including 37 years as a backseat driver. I'm chief economist of National Bank, chief economist of I Financial Group. So I know I experiment with Paul Martin when Canada was compared to Mexico, and we have the Mexican crisis in 1995, and it was not very good. At that time, our public debt percentage of GDP, federal debt was 73% of GDP. Guess what? Each dollar of federal revenue, 35 cents going to the debt service in 1995. Now it's 10 cents going to the debt service compared to 35 cents to the debt service per dollar revenue. So it's a complete different story. So my point is we are in much better shape. So we can stay dogmatic, passive, and just target 40 billion, 1% GDP, and be on the sideline waiting for the 10% tariff from Mr. Trump, or be proactive, avoid a 10% tariff threat by take care of national security, spend more military spending, and be prepared with our lower taxation rate, forget gain of capital inclusion rate, this kind of thing, and take care of Canadians, stimulate the economy, accelerate the GDP per capita. Otherwise, I think that it's a matter of time that we will realize quickly that anyway, we will miss our target.
The only area of employment that's been growing in the last couple of years is the public sector. And I'm told that there are as many people, if not more people, working for CRA as the Canadian military. Are you worried about the size of the Canadian public sector, or given your thinking that we could increase our deficit, should we be employing more people in the Canadian public sector?
Of course, I'm not happy about the growing size of the public sector. I think that we're on the red tape. We ask too much thing on the business side. When we deal with provinces, we ask a lot of condition to be completed before sending money. It's all about red tape and additional. So no doubt in my mind that officials do their best. They work very hard, but we have increased in a significant way different program in federal government. So yes, this is an issue. Having said that, what I propose is not to increase the size of government, is in fact to delegate more. Okay, delegate more to the provinces and the cities for the adaptation of climate change without many conditions. Just stop new social program, because as long we have not started to accelerate yet our wealth creation, I will propose what I call in French a moratoire before put in place any new social program and have a plan. So this government has increased the size government with many new programs, but it failed to create wealth with the GDP per capita decline. So what I suggest is, if you don't want to cut the size of government and cut the size of public workers, you have to reconsider the possibility to work with our deficit. It's not my first choice to work with our deficit and our fiscal anchor. But at the end of the day, it's better to have a higher deficit and a new fiscal anchor than really go with the status quo, because the current status quo is a recipe for a further decline of our standard of living.
You think that if we keep to our current fiscal target of 1% of GDP, it is a recipe for a worse economic situation?
Unfortunately, I have to admit that's my thinking. With Trump administration, if it will be Biden or Harris, it's another ballgame. But now you have Trump administration, who will be pro-growth. It will deregulate Wall Street. It will deregulate energy. In our case, we regulate more oil and gas, with the greenhouse gas emission. In US, it's the opposite. It will leave Paris Accord. It will deregulate energy sector, deregulate banking. So in addition, reduce taxes. So for me, if we stick with that, maybe it looked like working well, but failed to create wealth creation. But I think it's not a good recipe for the next few years. So this is my advice to Mr. Trudeau. It would be my advice to Mr. Poilievre, is Mr. Poilievre win the election in the next 3, 6, or 9 months, that, think about that. If you want to balance your budget, I'm not sure at the time that you stop immigration. For the first time in 6 decades, Brian, population growth in Canada will be negative next year. Never seen population growth decline. But with the new immigration target, the population growth will decline next year, and our economic GDP growth will decelerate in a significant way without a GDP per capita acceleration. So for me, whatever is Poilievre or Trudeau, you have now to put on the back burner all this dogmatic approach on balanced budget and deficit 1% GDP, and think more about stimulate the economy in innovation, or at least have a pro-business agenda. So, and maybe have some investment in infrastructure. I talk about high-speed train. I talk about military spending in Arctic and so on. This is my view.
You know, this program that you put forward is excellent. And I really thank you for doing it. It's something that I think that the Liberal government, the Prime Minister need to pay attention to. And I think that given the election of Donald Trump, if we don't, we're at risk of an economic calamity in Canada. I think that in addition to the issues that you talked about, which I think are very real issues, one of the things that I'm the most concerned about is immigration. And I do think that this threat of mass deportation, even the threat, and even as you say, if I'm not confident that he's going to carry through on that, I worry that even the threat of that is going to mean that there's a lot of people that may try to cross illegally into Canada. And so I think that the federal government needs to come up with a policy right away about how we're going to deal with illegal immigration, just in case it starts to happen. Because again, I think people move before the threat becomes real. And so therefore we need to be prepared before the threat becomes real. And then the other thing that I'm really worried about is his comment about drill, baby, drill. And the impact on energy pricing and energy supply. And, you know, you've commented about regulation, over-regulation. I don't know if we need to do drill, baby, drill, but maybe, you know, a couple more approvals and a bit of a quicker approval process is called for, such that we at least give people the incentive. So, sir, maybe you'd consider adding those two to your 5-point agenda. I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. Thank you, Senator. I really appreciate the role that you play and the agenda that you put forward. Thank you all for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me even from Ottawa at www.saga960am.ca. My podcasts and videos go up on social media as soon as the radio show goes to air. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you get a chance, or you can get me on podcast servers. Good night, everybody. Thank you very much, Senator. I really appreciate it.